Hey guys, I'm learning TFT and I'm sharing my learnings with you so you can learn and I can learn better as well. In this video, I'm going to go through early patch 14.5 stats analysis, the winners and losers of the patch, as well as a detailed stats analysis of all of the new and reworked items. I have a tweet that Dasik posted on X here, kind of going over his qualitative analysis of all the new and reworked items. I'm going to cross reference that with some patch comparison between 14.5 and 14.4 to kind of see how spot on he was with the qualitative analysis. I'm sure he was looking at stats too, but he was probably looking at a smaller sample size. And then I am going to go into a patch comparison between 14.5 and 14.4 to see which comps had the biggest movement. So these columns here are diff between last patch and this patch. And then I broke down the patch notes into what was buffed, what was nerfed, and trying to gauge how the meta is evolving and shifting so that we can get a better idea of how to approach this new patch. And then I put together a tier list on unit holds in order based off of kind of this meta analysis to figure out how to approach the early game. So that's the game plan for this analysis. And so we'll get started. I'm going to make a note here just so I don't forget to get to the meta report as well. So we'll start with the items. And Dasik said that Sterix Gauge, think about it as a defensive item that gives you 40% AD. You can even put it on backline units. They modified this item so that instead of waiting until you get below a HP threshold to get the AD buff, you pretty much get it up front and then you still get a shield over time. So the stats say that this is about the same. If you look in here, by the way, for all of this analysis, I am using MetaTFT's new Explore feature. They have an advanced mode where you can set the standard deviation and confidence level so that it will, especially for smaller sample size, be able to be more accurate in terms of the assessment on the AVP, top 4 rate, place change, etc. I mostly am looking at place change and unit delta because that's kind of more relevant to how the item impacts the unit, whereas AVP, top 4 rate, win rate can be affected by patch differences. So you can see that for the most part, Sterax is pretty similar across many of the top users. So there hasn't been that much change. Even on a unit like Samira, it's pretty similar. And there's not enough data on, like, let's say Zeri or an AD carry for us to draw conclusions on it, like what Dasik's saying. You can even put it on backline units. So we'll have to keep an eye on the data set there. Guardbreaker was reworked into Striker's Flail, so it no longer gives you damage amp when you hit a shield. Instead, it gives you more amp whenever the unit holder crits, which means that it's going to be better for units that have crit already, and typically better for AD with higher attack speed, since you can crit on a basic attack, but if your attack speed's higher, you're more likely to be able to trigger that. And on top of that, it can stack up to 4 times and it lasts for 5 seconds. So it's far more likely you're going to be able to get the 4 stacks of this if you have a high attack speed like Rage Blade built with it, and ideally with some kind of crit already so that the unit can take advantage of this damage amp. So if we look at the stats, for the most part, it's pretty similar. Even on a unit like Vex, it's quite similar because Vex already has built-in crit. from executioners. The place change is slightly worse, but when you look at a unit like Zaya, minus 0.2 to minus 0.45, it's a decent amount better than the last patch. And so Zaya, a lot of times you already wanted to build IE anyway. And when you combine that, and her ability was mostly single target, so she didn't benefit from the ability to hit shields as much. So it makes sense that it would be better on her. Also, Urgot is a good amount better, minus 0.4, minus 0.5 here, versus minus 0.3, minus 0.4 here. Especially because Urgot's ability, if we take a look at Team Builder, he gains massive amount of attack speed, 125% attack speed during his ability cast, which means that he's going to attack a lot. And therefore, he has a much higher likelihood of hitting max stacks here. So Urgot seems to synergize really well with the new Striker's Flail. So Day 6 analysis was better for AD carries, worse or the same for AP, and that was generally true. We take a look at like Brand, for example. It's pretty similar, like not a very significant difference. All right, Kraken's Fury, broken for attack speed carries, was Day 6 perspective. And based off of the data, it definitely benefits attack speed AD users. The way that it has been updated is it was Runon's Hurricane before, which benefited a lot from a high base attack damage. For example, with Senna was quite good. But now it attacks grant 3% stacking attack damage. So you actually want high attack speed to take advantage of more stacking, which is why it pairs really well with the new Rage Blade. And because it's granting you more AD over time, it's not as good for units that already have high AD, like for example with Senna. Senna has low attack speed and already has a lot of AD, so he's getting kind of diminishing returns on this. So when we look at the stats, one thing to keep in mind is that the 14.4 stats are probably skewed by Runon's Hurricane, the category 5 augment. So while this kind of comparison is not perfect, if we look at, let's say, Aphelios, minus 0.1, minus 0.2, and 14.5, and place change was actually positive here, much more negative here, but I think if you were to if there was the ability to remove category 5 as a filter here, I would assume that Aphelios is actually much better with this item now. Similarly, Kog'Maw went from +1, plus 0.4 to plus 0.6, plus 0.1. So Kog'Maw seems like would actually be quite good. And I think Demacian Raptor posted a new Kog'Maw buy build, reroll build that has been going around. And Cease and Desist Vi, which we'll talk about here, also got better likely because this Kraken's Fury is much better on Kog'Maw. And then Vayne and Senna are much worse now. So Senna was plus 0.2, minus 0.3 to plus 0.4, plus 0.1. And Vayne similarly quite bad now here, whereas it was like not great either here, but more acceptable, I suppose. So going back to Day 6 analysis, broken for attack speed carries, it's hard to really separate out the data, but it seems to be quite strong on Aphelios and Zeri as well. Yeah, Zeri doesn't seem to get as much of a benefit as... Where is Zeri down here? Here, plus 0.1, minus 0.5. Yeah, this plus 0.2 here. So Zeri does not benefit as much as Aphelios does, which is interesting. Not quite sure why that would necessarily be the case. Okay, so next we have Void Staff, the new static shiv, and the stats are about the same, even though Day 6 basically saying it's just broken on Annie, good for Ziggs, and that's it. It's actually a lot better on Viego as well. So if we look at the stat comparison here, overall the stats in 14.5 for this item are slightly better than it was in 14.4, 4.0 compared to 4.1 AVP. If we go into Annie specifically here, this looks very good, minus 0.4, minus 0.8 versus minus 0.2, minus 0.6. And then Viego was not even included here, but Viego's stats are minus 0.7 for each of these. And when you think about the way that this new Void Staff works, it's similar to Last Whisper, where it only shreds the unit or units that the attacks or abilities are hitting. And Annie, with a lot of amp, fires mini fireballs. So she's actually really great at spreading it. Plus, the new Void Staff has a lot more AP, which if you are playing Annie, it increases her burst ability and has starting mana of 15. So I believe in the builds for Annie, we can even just pull it up now. I believe blue buff Shojin and Void Staff is actually quite good. Yeah, right here, minus 0.3 basically, or blue buff Nasher and Void Staff are basically Annie's best build. So Void, if you're playing Strat Amp, it seems like that's very good. And I think if you exclude 6 golden or with 6 golden ox, it's still okay, but I don't think it's as good. So minus 0.1, minus 0.2 versus, yeah, the stats. And this makes sense because when you're playing vertical golden ox, you usually don't have as much amp, which means that the shred won't be able to spread as much. So Void Staff is usually going to be better when you're playing vertical amp with Annie. And Viego hits a large AoE of units. It gives him more AP, so more damage basically. And so that's why it's much better on Viego as well. Ziggs, Dasik mentioned, like, it's similar, not too different across the patch. And I was watching Wage and Iverson's stream, and he was talking about Void Staff, especially in Dynamo. He was arguing was very good. So if we look at here, Void Staff 3.4 versus 4.1. Yeah, if we just look at the difference when you're playing Dynamo versus not, Void Staff stats look very good. And specifically on Aurora and Elise. Elise also spreads it really well. So yeah, quite good. This new item is very solid. And then we have Guinsu. So Guinsu's new Rageblade change shifted from increasing attack speed based off of attacks to now being a grants 7% stacking attack speed per second. So it's similar to Archangel, where it just gives you more AP over time. And so Rageblade gives you more attack speed over time as opposed to based off of your base attack speed and how quickly you're attacking. Which means that it's going to be worse on double Rageblade holders. Mortog put together a video on this previously. And that also means that it's going to be worse on Zeri or just rapid fire units in general, because basically if you have double Rageblade, or if you can think about having the rapid fire trait in as like having half or a third of a Rageblade, you just don't get that exponential effect as much with old Rageblade, which kind of makes it not as good. So if you look at Zeri here, plus 0.1 about neutral to plus 0.3 to plus 0.1 here, Zeri still I believe wants to build Rageblade. It's just this makes her not as good, and we'll see here in, actually I didn't mention this here, kind of nerfed items for Zeri is new Rageblade is not as good for her. Whereas for Aphelios, it went from about neutral here to place change minus 0.2. And the one thing I really want to call out is Zaya around minus 0.2, whereas before it was about neutral. So now you can actually play, and part of the reason Vanguard Marksman has an improved AVP, I believe, is that now on your roll down, if you hit a Zaya 2 and you already slammed a Rage Blade, you actually don't mind putting Rage Blade on Zaya or on Aphelios. If you look at the stats, it's actually quite similar. Aphelios has a higher win rate here. Of course, all of these sample sizes are still a little bit low. Like, you'd like it to be higher. I guess 9,000 is still okay. 64,000 for Aphelios is fine. But yeah, this creates a lot more flexibility with Rage Blade. And on top of that, vertical anima, if you want to slam a Rage Blade on Vayne, although we'll see that here that Vayne Rage Blade stats are worse, plus 0.3, plus 0.4 basically, versus plus 0.2, plus 0.3. You can still slam Rage Blade on Vayne in early game if you're playing like a 3 anima or 5 anima opener, and then still be able to play Zaya Rage Blade if you want to angle. Let's say you were playing an early anima with Vayne, maybe trying to pivot into Vanguard Marksman, but maybe Aphelios is highly contested, so then you decide to just stay in anima, then you can still play Rage Blade on Zaya, especially if you, because usually with anima squad, you usually want to build a lot of traditional tank items, so it'll give her time to scale. All right, so Spirit Visage, Dasik was arguing this is a bad item. This is the new Redemption, which, where is it? Spirit Visage. Instead of healing the unit holding it as well as adjacent units, it now only heals for the user themselves. So it's a much more selfish item, and for the most part, it's either neutral or worse. Like, you would think Cho would be better, but it went from like plus 0.1 minus 0.5 to plus 0.2 minus 0.2. The only user that looked significantly better in the stats is Zach. The place change here, minus 1 versus minus 0.6. But for the most part, this item seems to be worse across the board. Even for like Mundo, like Gorilla Reroll, plus 0.3 neutral versus plus 0.4 and better unit delta. So yeah, like generally, especially if tier is a very valuable item, like you probably don't really want to build Spirit Visage as much. All right, Static Shiv and Indomitable new artifacts. He's basically arguing are both bad, and that was true in the stats. So the Indomitable average of 4.6 AVP, not very good. Static Shiv average of 4.8 AVP, not very good. Titanic Hydra, he argues, is broken for a bunch of 5 costs and maybe Aphelios. But looking at the stats, it wasn't very good. And you want high attack speed for it, but one possible thing that is super low sample size is maybe it's good with Mundo reroll if you have like double Warmog, especially if you have a scaling augment like investment strategy or cooking pot. We'll see later when we go to the comps analysis here that Mundo reroll looks pretty reasonable. There were a lot of buffs to that line, so that'd be something to keep an eye out for. And then Flicker Blade, Basic argues, is broken for a lot of attack speed carries. And if we go into the stats for that, you can see that it definitely makes TF and Vayne viable lines, and quite good with Aphelios as well. One thing to keep in mind is that this is basically like the old Rage Blade attacks grant 8% stacking attack speed, which I think is around double old Rage Blade. But every 5 attacks also grant AD and AP. So yeah, quite good for if you can combine this with Rage Blade. Actually, I'm not sure if you even need double Rage Blade. I'd need to look into the stats for that one. But if you get a Flicker Blade, it definitely unlocks the TF and Vayne lines. All right, so that covers all of the main new stats. Like Lichbane, the sample size is quite low, and it doesn't seem like Yuumi or Annie are much better with Lichbane. And Wit's End, still pretty small sample size. The overall stats got better. They buffed HP and armor, so it's better on tanks. Specifically on Viego and Renekton looks pretty good. Renekton stats are like not that dissimilar, but Viego specifically went from very positive deltas to like kind of neutral to negative. So if you happen to have a Wit's End for some reason, not that you would really go out of your way for it, and happen to get a Viego too, it seems like it'd be quite good on Viego. All right, so let's go into the comps differential. So I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to mainly focus on this diff column. And by the way, this is AVP, pick rate, win rate, top 4 rate. And for this patch, I filtered Diamond Plus because I wanted to get a larger sample size, whereas last patch, I filtered Master Plus. And one thing for the hero augments, I mainly got the stats by just filtering restars for that unit and looking at the item build that is kind of like BIS for it. So the sample size on that's still small. And like for Gragas, you can't really just assume if you pick the hero augment, you'll actually get to the 3-star, which is why I like modified the tier. But the more important thing is looking at the AVP diff here, which looks like much worse for Gragas. And I suspect that big reason for that is Redemption as an item was reworked. And when you're playing 6 bruisers, that heavily impacts that comp, which is also true for Fiddle reroll here. A big winner was Elise Braum reroll. Aurora was buffed, and there are fewer Morgana Bastion players. If we look down here, Morgana Bastion was one of the big losers in this patch. Higher 0.3 AVP and win rate, top 4 rate, all down across the board, which means that there are fewer players, opponents, taking your Elises out of the pool, meaning Elise is going to be easier to hit. Button Mash Poppy is neutral. Again, because there's going to be fewer Bastion Morgana players running around, it'd probably be easier to hit your Poppy 3. Let's see. Vanguard Marksman had a minus 0.2. And even though Leona was nerfed, Vanguard Marksman has always been a very solid top 4 comp. And the top 4 rate went from 52 to 55, slight increase in win rate. But because you have less top end comps running around, like Strat Amp was nerfed, Morgana Bastion was nerfed, Rapid Fire Renekton was nerfed. So now Aphelios has and Xayah are just a little bit more likely to stay alive in the late game and be able to maybe eke out a little bit more of a placement. Also, the new Rage Blade is more flexible, as I mentioned, between Xayah and Aphelios. Kraken's Fury is quite good with Aphelios. The new Striker's Flail on Xayah is quite good, and then Flicker Blade's also really good on Aphelios. So this comp got a lot of benefits from the new item reworks, despite the fact that Leona was nerfed. Let's see what else jumps out. 6 Golden Ox, the win rate went up, top 4 rate went up. And this again is because Morgana, Strat Amp, Rapid Fire Renekton, all these comps that tended to have pretty high caps where Golden Ox couldn't really, because Golden Ox is this snowballing effect, and if you could just win one or two more fights in stage 4, stage 5, that could be the difference between you getting like a 6th versus a 1st. And so removing some of these top end comps really helps out Golden Ox a lot. The downside is that because Vanguard affiliate Marksman Vanguard is quite good on the AD side, you're probably going to be contested by more Aphelios players. Even though the pick rate right now is lower, which is interesting, though I suspect this should stabilize more over time. 8 Techie got a buff. This can also align with Mundo reroll. I just saw Weijin play a game where he normally you play 6 Techie for Bruiser, but if you get a Techie emblem and are able to push levels, then you can hit 8 Techie as well. And yeah, that got a buff, so it looks pretty good. Cease and Desist Vi. Both Vi and Kog'Maw got buffs. The way you play it now is 6 Vanguard, 3 Anima, and you would re-roll basically these 4 1 costs here. And with Kog'Maw got a buff, and the new Kraken item is quite good. So this comp is like probably a solid top 4 if you can hit ahead of tempo. Definitely isn't going to win you a lot of games, but you can definitely look out for Vi more as well. And then LeBlanc reroll also got better. It still does not have a very high AVP, but there's probably more optimization to be had on this line. So I would look out for that. As players get better at it, this might actually jump out more. Big losers, Morgana reroll, Jack's hero augment. I wonder if this is kind of a combo with Morgana. Players may have kind of dual carried Jax and Morgana. And because 6 Bastion was nerfed. What else was Silas hero augment got worse? That's interesting. I'm not sure why that would be the case. I guess because Leona was nerfed. Shaco reroll. Shaco is also interesting why this would be slightly worse. This could also be a sample size thing. And then both Brand and Anima Squad got slight improvements. Street Demon, Rengar, and Ziggs got buffs. Ziggs is more consistent with his ability now. And Anima Cap Out with Aurora 2 was buffed, and 3 Anima was buffed in the early game. So in general, it looks like the AD line is mainly Vanguard Marksman. Zeri is still kind of low down here, which was true last patch too, because you're kind of gated behind making sure you have Pulse Stabilizer or Flux Capacitor. But on top of that, the new Rage Blade benefits Aphelios slightly more than Zeri. So yeah, like if you do have AD, it seems like this is definitely the angle to go. And then the AP lines and 7 Anima, if you have like a good Anima start, you can play towards Zaya. Brand is more consistent. Brand also just had a lower cap than some of these other comps, Strat Amp and Rapid Fire Renekton in last patch. But with those comps receiving nerfs and Morgana, Brand is able to perform more consistently, like slightly higher top 4 rate and slightly higher win rate as well. And Elise Braum reroll we talked about as well. So with that said, we can now go into the tier list, unit tier list I've created. This is designed around like kind of early game. This is not like a late game tier list. These are more unit holds in the early game. So Kog'Maw and Morgana are kind of your premier AD and AP item holders. And we saw that Dynamo is quite good, so Morgana can be an item holder to tempo into Elise. And Kog'Maw is a great item holder for Aphelios or Zeri. Now, Vanguards in Vanguard Marksman is quite good, so you would kind of be able to pair Kog'Maw, Vi, Silas if you find a Skarner works out well. And then the Bruiser line with Mundo reroll here or into Street Demon, and also with Shaco and Mundo can be quite good. Plus, we saw Alistar with the Golden Ox is quite solid. One other thing with Golden Ox is that Graves was buffed, and Graves is likely a lot more consistent in the early game. I think Weijin actually made a comment about how he will not be selling Graves as much and will try to play around Graves much more. So hitting an early Alistar 2 with Graves can be quite solid and give you a possible angle into playing 6 Golden Ox. Since that basically has the highest win rate in the game by a lot right now. Cypher, Draven, Zed, like, it's pretty neutral. So 6 Golden Ox definitely has the highest cap if you're able to get there. Nitro, like, seems kind of neutral right now. And then with the 6 Bastion nerf, with Morgana's line being nerfed, the Bastions just aren't as good to hold in the early game, it seems like. At the 2-cost level, I have LeBlanc because Cypher is still very good. If you are holding LeBlanc, you're mostly angling to try to get a 3-cost Cypher off of Carousel, so you're lose streaking, and angling into like one of the high win rate comps, which you could basically angle towards like Golden Ox or any of these. I have Jin here because Dynamo is quite good. Graves, we talked about. Like, if you have a strong front line, he could actually be a decent carry in the early mid game. He does kind of fall off in stage like 3-5, but stage 2 and early stage 3, especially if you get 2-star Graves, can be quite a monster and can hold items for Aphelios or Annie. We have your Vanguards here, build in really well into Vanguard Marksman. And Alawi, because Anima squad is quite solid. Silas, Seraphine, you're able to get those. Then having a 3 Anima start can be quite good because the 3 Anima weapons strength was buffed in this patch. And then we have Nitro's like kind of neutral. Veigar was buffed, but still doesn't seem that great. And with Amp nerfed, Nefiri just seems like okay. If you have Pulse Stabilizer, you can still go Dog Reroll. And then none of these seem that strong right now as well. Unless Twisted Fate and Vayne, we talked about, could be unlocked by the Flicker. What's it called? Flicker Blade. At the 3-cost level, we have the Cypher units. Cypher's still very strong. Elise is kind of the premier 3-cost carry right now that can really help you go fast 9. I think there's a fast 9 Dynamo comp that has been going around, and you can basically Elise 2 like seems like it could basically be like a 3.5 cost equivalent in strength, and then cap out with this board. Jarvan, because Golden Ox is quite strong, especially if you can play around Graves as well. Plus, leads into Vanguard Marksman, so easy transition across the board. And then Gragas, Mordekaiser, quite solid. Mordekaiser, if you have a good Exotech item, especially if you can get a frontline item on him early game, can be a very strong tank. Yuumi with Anima Squad, we already talked about Anima Squad being decent, though the cap for Strat Amp was nerfed. Braum with Elise, quite solid. And Jinx can build into Vanguard Marksman. The rest of these are not that strong and very conditional. So that covers the meta report and comp analysis, as well as the item breakdown for 14.5. I'd love to hear your thoughts, what you've experienced, what stands out to you. Questions, comments, feedback in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.